Thank you for being with me today. Pathology of an Incident, episode number 9. All episodes from 1 through 9 build on each other. Every episode validates the issues of this country, not from an opinion standpoint, but they're validated by actual history, history that is usually not taught in the classrooms, and certainly history that is very controversial. Hence, we got problems with the freedom of the press and freedom of speech today, and we've always had them. Yesterday, last episode number 8, I spoke about the problem of of the um, of the Constitution, the cultness, how the Constitution is a cult, um, based on being followed in spite of the fact that it creates injuries to a lot of other people. It is specific for the predominantly wealthy community, white people, and people with property, and people that enjoy privilege over the others. That is the basic foundation of the U.S. Constitution. So today I'm going to speak about the years 1953 to 1954, which for me overpower the 1776 and the Constitution because it was a moral idea for everyone. It wasn't just for people with property. It wasn't just for people anti-slavery or abolitionists. It was made for everyone. 1953, 1954 was when public school education had to open up its gates, its doors for everyone. It was not meant for a specific party. Now, the problem with 1953, 1954 lingers today. Again, because of the privilege that those that follow the Constitution like to enhance, like to follow, like to enforce. 1953 was when Pledge versus Ferguson in the Brown case was supposed to change the, uh, the functioning of our society in the United States. Now, our society was very much formed by a desire for assimilation. So all my episodes argue against assimilation. And certainly, even before the Constitution, we know of cases where communities, those that lived here before Europe landed here, were forced to change their education, make English the language of the territory, forced Puerto Rico in 1998 to only speak English in the classrooms. 1954 was a moral idea whose time has yet to come. Now, I'm going to, there's a reason why I'm picking 1953 and 54 today. And that's because we live in a society where everything is a spectacle. Certainly, politicians, when they're doing something wrong, love nothing better than a spectacle, something else to have happened, and in order to keep them off the front page. And we're a society that enjoys spectacles, like, for example, the selection of the Pope. That to me is a spectacle. I'm not judging it. Certainly, the picking of a king and queen, these are all spectacles. We live in the United States where spectacleism, word I just made up, is a very strong indication on what de Tocqueville said, that all Americans think alike. And certainly we do. The, the assimilation factor is a disease in this country. If we don't act like others are supposed to, like the majority, the privileged do, there is something wrong with us. And again, going back to the early ships from Europe started to land here, and they saw land. They said, "Land." Well, that was our destruction, because Europe only came here because they failed where they were. But as soon as they got to land, the first thing that they wanted when they saw the wealth here was to make sure that all communities from Alaska, that wasn't even a state yet, and across this side of the hemisphere, would follow missionaries. They would make sure that we would get sick, pneumonia, and everything else from the European problems that they brought here, and killed many natives. Moving right along, the separation of church and state when we selected the Pope is something that the Constitution says, but it's never done. And it's not done because it is not profitable to do it. There is more profit and privilege is manifested when we break the rules to the separation of church and state. And what it does, it takes away from the public school education. I'm not saying, I'm not going to agree or debate whether public schools are better than Catholic schools, better than private schools. I'm just talking about the morality of these institutions and which ones were formed without bias. Which ones were formed so when I pay tax dollars, they're not biased tax dollars. I don't want to fund biases. And certainly, and let me say, I went to Catholic school for the first 12 years of my life, from first to throughout high school. And I have studied public schools my whole life. I had to study the public schools because they were I had to study public schools because I knew what the Catholic schools were like. And they kept me out of many opportunities, and they stereotyped me in ways that hurt me forever. The bullying continued with me for people like me. And again, from the other episodes, if you haven't been following, I was born in 1945, 9 years before the Brown case, which means I suffered a lot of discrimination for the first 9 years of my life and for the next 15 to 20 years. And if not for the education that I've received, all the higher education that I received, attempts to assimilate me might have worked, but they don't work, not with me. So let's listen to this world of images that we love to abide by.
Money,
Power.
poverty.
Extreme inequality. There's always been an elite monopolizing capital.
Moi, j'ai très peur en ce début du XXIe siècle à cause de ce que j'observe dans les données historiques.
In the 18th century, money marries money, so poverty is a death sentence.
The way the elite stays in power is also by shaping the way that we think.
Make America great again.
We have a mythology that what's good for Wall Street is good for Main Street, but that's really never been true.
People are bankrupting themselves.
This transformation of the economy is generating a small class of very wealthy people.
And extreme poverty.
In advanced economies, 2/3 of the population is now on track to be poorer than their parents.
Most people view this as some sort of generational fight.
What happens to taxation? Large amounts of wealth are moved offshore.
People have the money to make sure they stay at the top. The system is rigged.
This is producing a new social story. People are starting to say enough of the inequality and enough of not having a story about how this ever gets better.
We can absolutely link the rise of fascism and extreme poverty. It is all about money.
Blaming your neighbour doesn't make you any richer.
There's going to have to be a political and economic reset.
We have to make choices about which future we wind up in.
It's a move towards creating a new vision.
The best weapon against totalitarianism is intelligence, the intellect. So when we understand the First Amendment, that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Yet, if you have access to my first book, Another's Mind, I give chapters, pages and pages of how we fund biases and how we fund institutions that fight against equality and fairness. Not in opinions. These are legal cases and experiences that I have documented. Again, Congress shall make no law, but in the meantime, we give out vouchers. We give out important sources of income and resources to institutions for whatever reasons are programmed to be biased. And now with the Pope, there's going to be an enormous amount of energy for the enhancements of public school, which, by the way, have failed. I am a consultant for Catholic schools that have been in trouble. And what I find in them for going under is not the lack of income from tuition, it's the biases and the prejudice and the racism that occurs. And eventually the parents figure it out and take their kids out of the Catholic schools. The black and brown people take them out. And then in order to get us back, they weaken the requirements, remove A&P courses, and do enforce a lot of policies that make it hard for us to be within those, to live within those parameters. It is not by accident, and it is not only because of sexual abuses that the Catholic schools are suffering economically. And as I've said in my books, that my belief that economic justice must be the worthiest and longest lasting of all struggles. We who understand this struggle are aware that there comes a time when patience becomes immoral. Hence we have 1964 and all those riots. We are impatient about the rights that we have and the rights that we have been denied. In my book of Another's Mind, I also spoke about the year 2002, Y2K, where I predicted at my university classes, I taught at Fordham and another university, that the biggest challenge of the 21st century would be issues of race and privacy. And certainly that has been the case. And also, a very important patient, well, I actually think that every page in my book, even the foreword, it's extremely critical. I wrote Another's Mind in the year 2011. And in there I write that complicating our progress, our morality, would complicating matters would be the Catholic Church alignment with multinational corporations, right-wing Christians attempting to influence the elections of the presidency and the appointment of the Supreme Court justices. How did I knew that, and we have found that the Supreme Court justices, they're already just about already, the majority were picked by Reagan and the Bushes, and the problems that we have now. And the Supreme Court justices that President Obama wanted were never allowed to even enter the arena for selection. And all these corporate dollars are financing the revolution, the emotional revolution, and the civil war that is still going on in this country. So I write in the paragraph also on page 71, this partnership, Christian fundamentalism, which Trump has said it all the time, the conservative Catholic Church and the corporate United States would be the main contributors to the widening gap between the have and have-nots. This nation, your United States, was in the process of providing the world a modern version of the third world status for many of us. Just walk the streets in New York City and in Westchester, and you will see how alive the third world status is. I also studied public schools because I was also a mentee with my mentor, Dr. Jan Hope Franklin, who worked with Thurgood Marshall on the Brown case. He was the historian on the Brown case. So I know the Brown case because the person who worked on it and I worked together for 12 years. And we communicated this. And I also went to, and you can see it on the screen, and I also went to hear Judge Carter, who Judge Carter said the following. Personally, I was with him at a very unique and important conference. Except for a short while following 9/11, white people have not been vulnerable and white supremacy continues. This sense of invisibility allows an elite group of designated leaders to govern with entitlement. Public schools have no entitlement. Now, they have them now. No, let me say that better. They were supposed to not have them. But people's greed, white people's greed, made sure and sabotage our public schools. And let me go back also to the year when the November 2nd, 1787, when African Free Schools was founded to provide education for the slaves and free people. So we, black and brown people, in 1787, had to establish our own educational area, institutions, because it was against the law to teach a black person how to read. And also how, it was illegal to also marry a white person. Carter mentioned the preservation of the person. I love this statement by him, that the preservation of the person has nothing to do with physical life expectancy and everything to do with intellectual expectancy. The intellect is what matters. Let's take a look at another video.
America is a nation guided by faith. Someone once called us a nation with the soul of a church. This may interest you. 95% of Americans say they believe in God, and I'm one of them.
A government that gets involved in religious faith based on all the lessons of human history is a prescription for disaster.
I'm worried about religion and ideology dividing us all.
God and government, faith and freedom, prayer and politics. Can they, should they, intersect? The issue of religion and its role in government is dividing nations from the United States to the Middle East to Asia. In India, the religion debate has turned Hindus against Muslims and other minorities.
There are a lot of people in India today who would like to say, listen, we're 80% Hindu. Let's just make the whole country Hindu. Let's make the whole government Hindu.
In Israel, Jews are pitted against Jews over the role of religion in society.
Since orthodoxy has taken over, it's bad for orthodoxy, it's bad for religion, and it's bad for the state.
Iran is ruled by Islamic conservatives.
God's law running the country based on Quran isn't dissimilar from running USA based on 10 Commandments.
But there is growing frustration.
I think it's important to understand that in most of the countries where religion has been involved in violence, it's because religion is involved in a contest for state power.
There has been a great religious revival, the rise of the religious right that has taken place around the world, not just the United States.
In this hour, we explore the volatile mix of God and government, crossing continents and cultures, and shaping national identities. Here in America, Some claim we are witnessing the most serious challenge to the separation of church and state in recent history.
You know, separation of church and state is the big liberal myth.
The agenda of the religious right, and frankly of this president, is a theocratic agenda.
We will always be a nation where religion and politics mix in a very animated and sometimes explosive way.
To make myself vulnerable again, which I do at just about all episodes. When we talk about God, and I mentioned episode 8, I believe that is my private feelings. It is private for me. I need not have to tell you, neither may not want you to know my feelings about religion. I don't accept organized religion. I'll admit that. But I'll also admit that I do believe in God. And it's my private feelings. Organized religion is something else that throws a twist into equality. And one of the things that Dr. Franklin taught me also, and something that religion does very often, that reminding people of their membership in a negatively stereotyped group raises people's stress and lowers their performance. When counselors, and this is a letter I wrote to Clinton that Dr. Franklin and I wrote a letter to Clinton because he was involved with the Initiative on Race in the year 2000. The year 2000 when it was supposed to stop because of computers. Mentioned it before. That because I have studied Catholic schools, and when counselors, and it's interesting how many Catholic schools there are where the majority of the students are white, and yet are black, and yet the counselors are white. So you have white counselors, just like you did with missionaries, trying to counsel black and brown people. They really have no business doing that. They're not. We don't live in a society where race doesn't matter. We have a long way to go before I have a white counselor telling me how I should feel and what they should tell their kids without my supervision. When counselors discourage minority students from entering advanced placement, they teach both minority and majority students that minority students are not associated with academic excellence, that stereotypes influence how people of different races and ethnicity view and treat each other. It is, what we have here is legalized. That discrimination has been legalized. To be pure and simple is the soft bigotry of low expectations. Low expectations in corporate America. A Puerto Rican, a Spanish, a Dominican, a black person is not assumed to be smarter than the supervisor they have. That's a cross. That's what the Constitution made happen. It is not by accident that these ideas, we were not born. First of all, we didn't ask to be born. Second, we did not ask that I should believe that. We were taught that. And to unteach that, when you've got privilege and you have to give up your privilege in order to live by what should be the moral model, you're not going to do it most of the time. And what's horrible about this is that because we live in a Darwinian society, those of us that, for example, that attend BOCES and are autistic or have a disability of some sort, or have not a disability, or autistic, but a challenge that they have to deal with, they too suffer more and are thrown to the wayside. And public schools have damaged this, have contributed to this bias. Let's take a look. There's a court case now, the United States District of New York, against the public school system based on BOCES students and disability. Let's go to the next slide. Plaintiffs in this lawsuit challenge defendants' systemic failure to provide equal access to education with students with disability and who are chronically absent or suffering from school avoidance, the reason they can't go to school. Now, a public school in 1953 was supposed to make sure that does not happen, but it happens because the wrong people are running this, because public school education are funded by tax dollars, which means if you live in the inner city and your property is not what it is in areas of Scarsdale and Westchester in the suburbs, those schools don't get the same tax allocation. The whole funding formula is sabotage to prevent, well, first of all, to prevent progress and prosperity, and to make sure that poverty remains a profit-making way of life. And being poor allows those that are not poor to prosper in life. So much to this. And let's go for one more slide before we end. Plaintiffs are among the approximately 200,000 New York City students who will be eligible for services because they have disabilities that affect access to education. My first early episodes, understand that if you do not have access to a service, that service does not exist. And that service is not only health benefits, which Trump is, the Republican side of the ledger is trying to take away, but it's not only Trump. That has been the history of this country. You know, from the beginning, it was like that. Trump is not the genesis. He did not give birth to privilege. So we have these challenges by institutions that are also run by, mostly white people, that formed them. How did they form? I'll give you one example how they formed it. During the 1960s, when I turned 18 and 19 years old, in order to avoid going to Vietnam, they made they created the draft so that if you went to college, you can avoid the draft and not go to Vietnam. So a lot of kids, and mostly white, that didn't want to go to Vietnam became teachers, went to school to get their teaching degree and become teachers. Us that were black and brown, we couldn't afford it. So we had to join the army because the military, because our economic choices were not as abundant, or they were not even abundant. They were tiny. And when World War II ended in 1945, those black and brown veterans were denied access to getting home mortgages. 99% of the mortgages and home lending went to the white veterans, not the black ones. All social issues are solvable and will be solvable one way or another. And the public school is the only antibiotic, but it has to be run with the intentions that it was supposed to have been done, not by the way it has been politically sized. I want to thank you for today's episode and look forward to many of them. And you have access to me. I have books that I can share with you, speak to anyone at any time, meet with any groups, debate anything you want to debate. You have access to me. You have access to this data. Let's make this society work. Thank you.